Welcome to Therapists Uncensored, a podcast where therapists freely speak their minds about real-life matters.
Hey there! Welcome to Therapists Uncensored. We are so happy that you have found this podcast, and I think you've found a good one. It's interesting and, frankly, pretty sexy. This episode is about couples with unequal sexual desire, and it is hosted by Dr. Ann Kelly, and discussants include the podcast co-hosts Patty Alwell and Sue Marriott. So without further ado, let's get right to it.
Thanks, Sue. I'm excited to talk about this. No pun intended, but I am excited to talk about this conversation because I think unequal sexual desire, why do I want to talk about it? You say it's common. I think it is in most relationships we have an unequal sexual desire. And
that's right. There's one pervert, right?
Exactly.
And one prude. Or at least that's how we end up feeling in either of those positions.
That's exactly as you say. That's how people end up feeling. How people feel about having unequal sexual desires is a huge part of the whole process.
And not only do they feel like a prude or a pervert, but the one who has the higher desire feels unloved because the partner doesn't want to have sex with them, and the one that doesn't feel like having sex feels like, wow, maybe I'm not in love with my partner anymore.
Yeah, they can really draw some insecurities or too much emphasis about it.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Either that or just what's wrong with me that I'm not feeling these normal feelings or what feelings that I used to feel.
I think the what's wrong with me is probably the biggest thing that I want to talk about today because I think unequal sexual desire is in most relationships that we come across. If not all. I mean, what's the likelihood?
Oh, I think it's universal.
I think it's true.
Because eventually in a relationship, you'll get there. I mean, even if it's temporary, right?
Right. Yeah, people have different levels. And the idea that some couple would be lucky enough to have the exact same level of desire.
Except that in the beginning of a relationship, often it looks like we're the same, right? Because there's a lot of sex, and we're always turned on, and so
we always invited, and we always wanted.
Exactly. So
we can't wait to get back to it. And
right.
But
we're preoccupied. But over time in the relationship, then we go back to our normal levels.
Which
probably.
in all honesty, if we didn't, I kind of laugh at this because there's a reason it has to be unequal. Because if it wasn't, we would get nothing done in the world.
That's right.
It's a population control for some of us, as well as we have to get out there in the world and produce and be productive. And if we had the exact same sexual desires as we did in the first 2 years, that would be also lovely, but also a little scary for the world. But how that gets played out in relationships is one reason I want to talk about it, because it feels important to try to bring it into a conversation in between couples. And I'm hoping that this podcast helps couples talk about it. Because what happens as we move along and we start noticing the unequal sexual desires, oftentimes couples don't talk about it. We just mentioned, one person says, what's wrong with me? Or the other one says, why don't you want? It becomes an issue or a conflict so quickly. And for me, as I notice it, is that how the unequal sexual desire, as it develops, how it's handled in a relationship can hugely impact how it actually, in my opinion, plays out in the relationship. Because how two people begin to feel about it and talk about it can hugely...
Or not talk about it.
Good point, Patty. Or not talk about it can usually tilt how it develops and intensifies. And I see sexuality like a dance. And as one partner shifts, the other partner shifts, and it keeps going. Well, here's a great example. As you start noticing, let's say you're the one with less sexual desire than your partner, and you start noticing that, and you're going out on a date, and you're coming home, and you're going, oh my gosh, I know he or she's going to want to have sex. I just don't know if I'm in the mood, and oh my gosh, you may go to the what's wrong with me in your own head, or he or she's going to get angry. Now, I don't know about you guys, but either one of those internal dialogues, not so sexy, right. Not likely to generate a response in your own body, nor your partner's body, because then your partner thinks, oh, if, my gosh, I want sex, and I don't know if he or she's going to want it. So we have this dance of a dialogue that, as we know through the talking that we've been doing in other podcasts about how our bodies interface with the chemicals in our body and the way our brain works, our minds, as that starts interfacing, it also affects how our body's going to respond.
Right.
So are you trying to say that if I'm worried, I'm not going to be kicking out the right chemicals for a hot, sexy night?
Exactly. Well put. Not so sexy.
Right, because our mind is the biggest sexual organ
Yes,
that we
absolutely.
have.
Exactly.
So when our mind is off going wacko, then
That's so true.
wacko either direction.
Either direction. Yeah, the anticipation, the one that has more sexual desire, the anticipation of rejection, the anticipation of if I'm going to go towards and is it going to be received, that's really, really difficult. And
Stressful.
It's very stressful, produces cortisol, not so oxytocin producing as we've mentioned in other parts of our podcast. Yeah, so our mind starts to produce ways that makes that whole interaction start to feed on itself. And
that's a great point. So kind of what we do with it, it's going to either exacerbate make it more severe.
exactly.
Or perhaps we could figure some things out that would help.
Exactly.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't change the amount of desire, it could damage the relationship, which in lots of different ways.
Absolutely, because so many emotional tensions can draw out of it that can last to the next day and the next day and then feed on itself.
So what am I supposed to do if I'm caught either in the not that into it place or the pursuer?
That's a great question. And, a step before before we start talking about what to do,
Okay.
I think the deeper you can understand it and not generate even inside your body.
So I just want to fix it. So
you just tell
You
me
just want to have a climax here, right?
exactly. Let's get to it. Y'all can tell which one I sit on, right? I'm a little overeager.
give me the cliff notes. Well, I think in the process it might even be helpful to talk about sexuality and desire and how it develops and waxes and wanes, just so that we develop a deeper understanding for ourselves. And in particular, if we talk about it for women, and maybe just talk about it, the differences that some women experience as a men. Again, not universal. We don't make any assumptions, but women's bodies do have a different way of responding to sexuality than men's. And so whether you're in a heterosexual or a same-sex relationship, the same things play out to be true. And so if we talk about and let me throw in one other thing. If we learn so much about sexuality through media and what we see in the movies and what we see in TV and how those relationships play out, and we are led to believe that sexuality, the minute we start kissing, even though we're 8-10 years into a relationship, we start kissing our wife or our husband, our whole body turns on, we end up on the floor, and everybody is in the same spot. And so we believe, I think so many people believe that's the way our sexuality is supposed to play out. So when our body doesn't respond like that, we think something's wrong. And I think if we could coin the first 2 years of relationship as we spoke about it, we all
Sometimes it's first 2 years, but sometimes it's like the first 2 weeks or
2
months before
before you start
before it
feeling
comes.
that. But if we talk about the difference between men and women's bodies a little bit, again, don't want to be stereotypical because I know it varies, but if we think about the way a man's body reacts to excitement in a woman's body, there's a very obvious difference. Generally, when a man doesn't take often all that much for once a man gets excited to get an erection. And once he has an erection, it doesn't take typically a lot to maintain that. Once a man gets excited, there's not a lot of thinking generally that is involved in maintaining that. Now, of course, if they start anticipating getting rejected, that could definitely, or there's all sorts of other issues that can come up. So we're talking generalities. But because a man can respond pretty quickly to sexuality, in my experience, most women, after the first period of excitement, isn't as immediate, and it ebb and flows a lot more for women. A woman could be having a glass of wine at dinner and feel very turned on and very excited, and on the way home gets a call from somebody, and their the babysitter, the sexuality shifts on a dime and may come back and ebb and flow. Is that y'all's experience in talking with people?
I certainly think that some men and women operate that way, but there's lots of men that show up in sex therapists' offices with erectile dysfunction and really concerned about their sexuality. So I just don't want to make it so universal, because we certainly see lots of variation across the spectrum.
Absolutely. I don't want to make it universal. It's what I sort of was suggesting before when I was saying not across the board, and men have different issues that affect their ability to feel excited and their ability to maintain that. But if we're talking about generalities in terms of bodies, I think a lot of media sort of suggests that the minute penetration happens for women, that physiological experience should match what a man experiences during penetration. And I'm not so sure that generally across the board is not universal.
Yeah, that's right. And so I like the point you made right there, Anne, about the so whatever journey the man, like, just to use a heterosexual example, right? So whatever journey the man goes on to get excited, and then to like that the moment of penetration for him adds to excitement, most likely, right? That's
for many men.
For many men, right? Whereas for women, what you're saying is that we're supposed to squeal and be delighted, and that is the pinnacle of what we've been dying, longing for, is to be penetrated, right? But that I think you're suggesting that it doesn't necessarily work that way as quickly for women, or as what's the word?
As immediate,
right?
Right, and it can, for many women it can, but there's this process too of, for many women, the process of sort of allowing themselves to get to a place to be ready for that as well, and that what goes on in the relationship, if a woman is ready and is more open-chested and ready for that.
What do you mean by open-chested, Anne?
What I mean is...
It's a great word, but I'm not sure I get all of it.
The ability to feel relaxed and to feel able to turn towards your partner and feel vulnerable. And I think when a woman is open-chested, all sorts of sexuality can come out. And certainly that's not promoted if your sexual desire is not quite as high, or if you're worried about not being there or disappointing your partner.
So it's sort of about safety and receptivity?
Exactly. Good way to state it. Safety and receptivity. If we have unequal sexual desire and we start feeling worried or stressed or thinking something's wrong with us, it's a way of creating, as we were talking about a few minutes ago, a body of tension, not of open-chestedness. And so certainly that is not necessarily going to promote our whole entire internal system being as receptive to penetration or anything else. And so the more couples, I think, are heterosexual or same-sex, are engaged in the process of helping to create that open-chestedness. We kind of laugh about it as, women need foreplay and men are ready to go, but that's not exactly what I'm speaking about.
Well, I think that in some ways you're bringing up like different kinds of desire. So there's genital excitement, which is one kind of desire that both men and women have, or don't have, or what have you, right? But and then there's this open-chested piece that you're talking about. It feels to me like maybe another kind of desire that one can be
sort of longing for connection.
Also, like the feeling of openness and safety, which is, I think, somewhat independent from the genital sexuality.
Definitely.
Right? And so women can just be genitally sexual and conquer sex and whoever their partners are, and men as well. But then there's this other piece, in looking at a long-term relationship, that our attachment systems get activated, and therefore that affects our feeling of safe, the open-chestedness that you're talking about, that on another plane affects whether or not we're connecting or not connecting.
Exactly. And as you say that, so it kind of reminds me, it's getting back to the unequal sexual desire. If, let's just say in this case, specifically the example being a woman having less, although certainly oftentimes it's the other way around. But if a woman's sexual desire is a little bit less than their partner's, if they start feeling something's wrong with them and they should have the exact same sexual desire and something's wrong, then they can get distracted in that process.
Or they can fake it.
Or, oh my God, that's so true. And then they learn to fake it, which then the power of association comes out. That's one thing I want to talk about. We are all Pavlovian on some level.
This is such an interesting topic because of the multiple levels of vulnerability that people in relationships are sharing, or in some cases not sharing.
So let's say you and I are having sex, Patty, and I'm not as into it as you are, but I don't want to hurt your feelings, then I'm going to fake having an orgasm in order, to avoid a lot of these feelings, right? Like, we're just going to solve this problem real quick. But I think your point, Ann, is that if I do that very much, then I'm actually
decreasing your
it
desire. It
decreases my desire because I'm like, oh, do I have, and like kind of like what you were saying earlier, do I have the energy to do that? And in a sense, just to take care of you. And instead of, like, that becomes the association with sex instead of, ooh.
It gets paired in a negative way. Yes.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful point because I know Esther Perel says that desire is not politically correct. You have to be selfish to have an orgasm. So if you're paying attention to your partner and, is he or she feeling comfortable? Am I hurting them? You're not going to have an orgasm. It's impossible biologically to be totally focused on your partner's comfort, and I don't mean
feelings and whether they're hurting their feelings.
Right. I do not mean that we aren't loving and compassionate, but at that moment of orgasm, you have to pay attention to yourself. You have to go for what you want.
It's just such a great way to say it. And if what you want isn't matching and you think, I don't have the sexual desire right now that my partner does, and I should, so I'm just going to work on, having my partner have satisfaction and then in this to get through it quicker, then you're developing a power of association that exacerbates and decreases your sexual desire for the next time.
Right. Yeah, and you had, before the tape was rolling, you had mentioned an example, a heterosexual example of how that works, where that the man begins to notice that she's not as into it, and his response is to hurry.
Oh, yes. Because we are so perceptive to each other. And when you can feel your partner not quite there, sometimes there's all sorts of ways you can react, but sometimes a man might hurry and try to rush, or the woman might even want him to hurry, to rush, because they want the one with more sexual desire to be pleased and to get the orgasm, and that could be really loving. But if a man is rushing, it may be the assumption that they can't bring their partner along, and they can by knowing the sexual desire is unequal, but attending to it and slowing down and not be focused just on penetration for one, but to bring the partner's mind along. And we've been talking around this. Let's talk directly. See, when you said, what do I do? We have to attend to our partner's mind and body, which sounds a little different than what you were saying, Patty, but not. Let me get around to that. And that is, if I know my partner, I could feel my partner's wanting to have sex for me, but the ability to pull away and shift and engage the mind through verbal talk, through verbal play, to pull away, maybe to be direct, if a man's penetrating, to pull out naturally and playfully, and allow some element of pursuit to happen. Because one of the things that has to happen for sexual desire is we have to have a little bit of pursuit, a little bit of unavailability, a little bit of across the room. And if one has more desire than the other, the person that has less desire never gets that opportunity for pursuit. And we could talk about that more just in general in terms of the dance around it.
But I like what
even
you're
in the
saying.
moment, the idea of pursuing.
So that, like, if he pulls away a little bit, that in this one example, then it might, if I'm back on my heels, I'm gonna feel his desire, but I'm not gonna feel my own.
Yes.
And but if he pulls back a little bit, then I'm gonna feel like, whoa, don't go. Like, I'm right let's do this together. Like, oh wait, there's my desire. Like as the space gets opened for me, then I can find it.
You can find your own desire.
But if every time I look, there's, I'm getting elevator eyes, or like, am I going to have my chance? Am I going to have my chance? You're saying, and that then the person who's being pursued, it's just both of them can feel is his desire.
Yes, in that moment, yes, and for him to pull away some, not in a rejecting her feeling way, but in a playful, eye-to-eye, open-chested way, and maybe create a sense of. But the one of the most important things is to not make your partner's lack of desire in that moment to be the issue.
Right.
To
pathologize.
To pathologize it, or something's wrong. And I think so often that's so hard. I know what we're talking about is difficult because you want to be desired, both partners do, but to pull away and allow the playfulness in the moment to be there and say, I don't think you're quite into it. Hey, and make it more playful and more understanding rather than to just kind of pull through it. So you're saying
kind of moving from the genital arousal to the open-hearted arousal.
Exactly.
Like, so this person's not genitally aroused, so let me go heart to heart. And by going heart to heart, that we leave space then to meet again genitally. Like,
yes.
Well, and the research that that sort of addresses this says that most of us feel desire, and then we start pursuing our partner and stimulating our bodies, right? But some people, a subset of people, don't feel the desire till they're stimulated. We sort of think it works in one direction. So if I'm the person that doesn't feel the desire, I go to that place of worry, like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my relationship?
As if desire exists in and of itself.
Right,
Yes.
and what happens is that decreases my interest in sex, and it decreases my ability to enjoy sex. Where if I could understand that, hey, maybe I need to, like, get into this a little bit.
Make it?
Well, it's a little bit that way. Start to play around and see if I'm desirous of my partner at that moment. And I think the all or nothing kind of idea about this, that if we play around a little bit, I have to have sex, is really a false paradigm for some people. They don't feel the desire until they start playing around.
Wonderful point.
I think the research that you're talking about has to do with the high T and low T, and which has to do with unequal desire. So that we naturally and the T standing for testosterone. And so Jeff Lutz actually has this great metaphor of high T and low T folks, which is that if I'm low T, if I'm high T, I'm like a gas stove. One click and I'm burning. And I'm hot, ready to go. So the low T is more like an electric stove. We turn it on, we wait, and, but once I get heated up, I'm just as hot and ready to go as my high T person. But exactly what you're saying, that sometimes the activity has to happen first in order to stimulate it, instead of desire happening first.
Right, and so what the partner and the person that has the lower desire have to do is be willing to play with the idea. It might not go where you want, but it might.
Right.
And take the shame away of, I don't feel it before we start.
That's exactly right.
Oh, take the shame and the pressure of I don't feel it before we start, and allowing the process to develop and the slow burn. And that there's a lot of ways. And that's the fun about having a long-term relationship, that to let that slow burn be a lot of different ways. And that's when we get to your point about what do we do about it, to talk about that in either during sex or not during sex, is how does that slow burn develop, and to have creativity in that, and to have no shame in that, and to let that be part of the fun.
And curiosity.
Oh, curiosity.
I think curiosity around sex is so important. The idea that I don't know what I'll feel like when we start. Let's see.
Right. And it won't only be orgasm driven.
Right?
Yes.
We might not end up in an orgasm, but we could end up all kinds of wrapped as pretzels with each other and fall asleep.
And
that
taking
would be awesome.
the pressure of the orgasm away for both partners, and with a low T, not having an orgasm but not having shame around it, who knows what we're going to feel tomorrow, because we could get stimulated and we went to bed without shame and without guilt and excitement, and who knows what will develop. But you know what? I want to actually stand up for the high T for a second, because we're talking about how to tend to the low T. But the high T, I love Jeff Lute's description in that, we all also sometimes feel a need to be wanted and to have desire. And when you have the higher desire, it's something that you don't get to have, that you have a longing for. So of course you're looking at your partner and you wish that not only would they want sex, but they would want you, and that you could feel that. And that's such an important part of the relationship. And if we think desire should be expressed only when we feel it in that one way of this intense genital stimulation, and we're waiting for that, and we don't have that, we forget to express attraction and desire in all these other ways. Flirt towards our partner and tell them how attractive they are and how much you want them. And you can tell your partner that you want them even though your genital body isn't screaming excitement. And I think we wait for that and think, oh, well, that's when I'll express desire, but I don't have it.
I also think that the person who has the lower desire is afraid, if I express my attraction to you, you're going to want to have sex. I'm going to get you turned on, and oh my God, then I'll have to deal with that again.
That so often happens, so that then they withhold that. And that in and of itself becomes an issue in a relationship. And you'll often hear the one with higher desire says, not even that I always want to have sex, I just want to feel wanted.
Yeah, she stopped touching me. She used to kiss me on my neck. He used to hold my hand when we were out. Whatever the things are that have gone away, because the person with the lower desire is like, I don't want to get that started.
Exactly.
And another thing comes to mind specifically about same-sex couples, which is when you have two women, you have this in stereo, what you're describing. And so, and again, we're talking about gender roles, but that it matters related to us getting together. And so when usually women aren't socialized to be the pursuer and to be the invader, to be the one in that high desire position for very long, because then we're so aware of making the other person uncomfortable. So what will typically happen if there's a shift, so we have an unequal desire, but rather than staying in a pursuit position, often the woman will lower her natural desire to match her partner's desire level. And so the idea behind this is that we want, I think, to promote really being mindful if that's what you actually want to do, instead of just automatically moving into the position where you're not invading.
That's a really good point. It's a very good point.
Whereas with men in a heterosexual relationship, men are socialized, or in a same-sex male relationship, men are socialized to be the pursuers. So they will pursue more often, according to research. And so the sex tends to be higher frequency because the pursuit is there, but not necessarily with women. The sex is less frequent at times, but it is reported as more satisfactory. And I think that is because of some of what you're talking about this open-heartedness. So it's what's good about this, I think, is knowing the different positions that, again, they're not specifically related to gender, but we're talking about them in gender terms to be able to sort of clump it out and talk about it. But if you're in the being uncomfortable to pursue, rather than just not pursuing, we might really want to
explore that.
That's right.
See what
because
it feels like.
what you might want to do is ask your partner, do you want me to give up on this? Would you like me to, is that what you actually want? And usually the partner's going to go, no, that's not actually what I mean for you to do. This is on I want to have sex in my relationship. So let's not, agree not to, or have to have everything lined up perfectly before we do, for exactly the point you were making, Patty, of maybe the desire will come after we begin.
Well, I'm not looking for it to be exactly lined up. And I think part of what you're bringing up, Sue, that's so important, and again, getting to the how-tos, is that for humans, like you mentioned before, our minds are our biggest sexual organs. And that to think about and to get to play with different roles and say, I'm not used to being the pursuer. What would it be like to be the pursuer? What would it be like to be able to pursue my partner and to try on this different role that would actually probably shock our partner, you know?
Right.
And let me get back to the sort of the high T again, the one with higher desire.
Yeah, that's good.
One of the things that's so important is that when you have more desire, and of course, if your partner sort of expresses a little bit of desire, it's really hard pressed to say, hey, don't always act on that, because you're saying, are you kidding me? I don't get sex enough. My partner's willing and wanting. Why would I wait? But it is really important every once in a while to go, I like it, having fun, but I don't think anymore right now. And because what happens there is it allows your partner to have that, as we were speaking, that space to pursue and not think it is always going to lead to sex, and that there is going to be some diversity and some ability and some room for pursuit. So it is important for the one with a high desire to not always be just, ready and willing and waiting, because it's kind of sexy to have to pursue and be the one that is the assertive one.
That reminds me of a theory that Jack Morin put forward, that desire is interest plus obstacle
Yes.
equals desire. So if you don't have a little bit of an obstacle,
You gotta have a little bit of an obstacle.
you're not going to have much desire. It's sort of similar to what Esther Perel says, which is that you need a little distance to feel your desire. And whether you think of distance as the obstacle in this case, it's sort of like,
space.
yeah, if everything is available, if you can go to the buffet 24 hours a day and have as much food as you want and as any kind of food that you want, it's far less interesting than when you have to think about it, go to the kitchen and cook a little bit, and then have this.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's you can get oversaturated there.
So what you're saying, Patty, is if you have a higher sexual desire, how do you not present yourself as just an open buffet?
Exactly.
So one of the things, if you imagine you have the higher sexual desire and you actually turn to your partner and give him or her just this awesome back rub that was really teasy and wonderful, then kissed him on the ear and said, "Good night, sweetie," and turned around.
Oh, yeah.
You know what
that
I mean?
would go well.
That would go well.
That would go well.
Right?
That would get a thumbs up right there.
There's like, and then maybe,
Exactly.
then maybe he or she thinks, oh gosh, I know he wants sex and da-da-da, and they pursue you. Say, no, I don't want to. I'm a little sleepy. But you make it loving and not rejecting, but a little playful, and maybe through note writing, etc. But again, the use of your mind and your body interfacing.
Or actually, what I was imagining you were going to say was, well, I kind of want to, but I don't think you're totally into it right now. So I'm going to wait.
I'm going to wait. Exactly.
I'm going to wait because I want this to be good for both of us.
I want this to be good for both of us, and I want you to be able to be into it. And the most important part, if I can stress nothing else, is the I'm going to stress it, girl. Is the non-shaming dynamic for either one.
Yes.
To not shame the one that has higher desire.
Right.
As being obnoxious and intrusive, and not shaming the one that has a lower desire, but to be able to go, not tonight because I don't think you're in the, and I want to wait till you are, or I want to play around, and to not, if it is in a heterosexual relationship or two men, to not have the penetration be the only aspect of sex, to allow there be all sorts of other ways to bring open-chested and playfulness and leave that out and consider that very sexy and having had sex. Because there's not penetration, that doesn't mean, according to Clinton, that sex didn't happen. Right? So we could have had sex and not had penetration.
Or orgasm.
Very or orgasm, thank you, yeah. And it could be very sexy and playful.
Right, thinking of our whole bodies as a sexual. We talk about our mind, we talk about genitals, but our hands, our back, like you were saying, our feet. So that it really opens up the idea of sensuality and
eroticism.
so that the person with the low T, instead of just having this one tiny runway to get to them, and then it's not going to happen very often because, how often does that line up? But if we open the whole field, the massage or the touching of the hair or what have you,
or the eye contact, the deep eye contact,
that person
over
can
dinner.
feel that as sensual and sexual, so they're not feeling so deprived.
Yes,
or the sexy text, or the note left in the bathroom when you go to work, or whatever it is.
And which makes me think of another thing that often, particularly in long-term relationships, I'm comfortable with this circle of activities, and you're comfortable with this circle of sexual activities, and then where we cross over that little space there, that's what we do. And we do that all the time. We do that a lot. And
it's repetitive and it's predictable, which is the inherent suggestion.
That's right.
That's the recipe for the lack of sexual desire.
Right. Well, you'll end up losing your desire, because where's the novelty? Where's the space that y'all were talking about? There's no pursuit.
And it becomes orgasm focused.
Which is really funny, because we talk about in this podcast a lot about safety and needing safety. But sexuality is the exception to that, right?
Exactly.
We also need a little heartbeat. We need a little
novelty, a little risk.
A little risk, right? A little, not fear, but like excitement, difference.
Right.
Because if we get that, unlike, for a long-term relationship, unlike trust, which as we are just close for years, our trust grows naturally. Sexuality is the opposite. We actually have to really think about this and work on this. So going back to the Venn diagram really quickly, there's things you can do to separate that out and get, or to redo your diagrams. Like, what have you not tried but are willing to? What are your absolute no's? What are you possibly open to but you've never done? And then of course you have your comfort areas. And then redoing that and having those kinds of conversations might be another way of sort of the
how-tos
of reinvigorating it, even just verbally, and talking about it, about what what might be on our plate going forward.
I also think that it's really surprising how many couples never talk about sex. Or when they talk about sex, they say, "Do you want to do it?" And that's the level of conversation. So I think even just encouraging a lot more discussion, and not necessarily at 10 o'clock when you've climbed into bed together, but sometime over coffee or when you're having a glass of wine, to talk about what your sex life is like and what things are exciting to you and not exciting.
I think that's a great point, Patty, and to be able to make that a safe conversation. And one of the ways to do that, I think, especially on the topic of unequal sexual desire, is to be able to talk about it's kind of hard to be the one, to be able to listen to your partners. It's kind of hard to be the one with all the desire, or it's kind of hard to be the one that has the lack of desire.
Right, having empathy for the other position.
And to be able to talk about it and connect and say, of course that would be hard. Instead of, because so often we defend and we feel it as a blame. So if a partner's going, I'm the only one that ever pursues, then the other person oftentimes will say, that's not true. I did this, or, well...
Don't you remember on Valentine's Day 2014?
I put on lingerie.
Or what the heck, how can I pursue? I'm doing 50,000 things during the day and I'm exhausted.
But you're defensive.
Yeah, I'm exhausted. That's why I don't pursue. And so it's so easy to say through a defense as if you should want to pursue. It should be that way, that you should have the same desire.
And you're doing it wrong.
And you're doing it wrong. And so how you approach your partner in a safe way to be able to go, of course it would be hard. And
so this really reminds me of some research that John Gottman did, where he talks about the difference between complaining and criticizing. So criticizing is saying the fault for this lies in my partner. Exactly. You're the problem. You don't want to have sex. You won't do this. You know, and complaining, on the other hand, which he calls the antidote for criticizing, is, I'm kind of disappointed that we didn't have sex. I really kind of felt sort of aroused, and it's really taking back the ownership for your own feelings. And then your partner can have some empathy for that. Yeah, I know you're disappointed. I wish I was up to it today. As opposed to having to defend themselves about
why.
It's not my problem. You're the one that, it's good to be able to get your feelings out, because yes, you probably are disappointed if you're the one that has the higher desire, because you do desire your partner. And that's something your partner can say, oh, I know that feels bad, and oh, I'm glad you desire me.
That's such an important, and that probably is the biggest challenge that we can see across the board in relationships is how to be able to state what's going on inside of you without making it a directive towards your partner failing you. And even sometimes partners do a beautiful job of complaining, but that doesn't mean the partner doesn't hear it as a criticism. And that is a real challenge.
Totally. That's actually what I was going to say, was even if, so again, going back to you're my sex life Patty, that if you were to come to me and say that you were disappointed, that even if you do a really nice job, I can imagine, again, going right back into just because I already feel bad.
Hearing, I disappointed you.
Right. So on one hand, the soft startup is important, but then also really being able to hear. You're just saying you're disappointed. Yeah. You're not saying I'm a horrible person.
Yeah.
You're not saying I'm all those things.
And I'm not saying I'm disappointed in you.
Right.
That's a very big distinction. I'm talking about my feelings.
Right.
And what's happening inside me. And even if it is hard,
but isn't it my responsibility to take care of your feelings?
Not in a mature adult relationship.
Oh, that's the problem.
However, I don't think any of us are having a mature adult relationship where we're feeling insecure and uncertain.
Yeah.
So I agree with being able to say it that way, but I'm also a favor. I'm agreeing totally with Gottman, and that is, not only do you say, like, I was disappointed, but throw your partner a bone while you do it. Throw your partner a bone in that, so we don't want to talk to you. I'm a little disappointed that we didn't have sex, but I know you would want to have sex with me, and you're attracted. I know that you love me and want that, and we're just different right now, so I just need to whine a little bit.
So what you're bringing up is super important, so important that I want to keep talking about this on another podcast where that we really talk about how to not hit the back of the brain of our partner, or just, it's not, we're talking in the language right now on purpose about couples, but this applies to all relationships.
It applies to all relationships,
Right.
Also how we communicate with the people we love so we don't destroy the relationship.
Or even just, or even destroy it, or even just begin to have little rifts.
Yeah.
Like disconnections that are preventable. So I propose that we meet again, and that we pick up the conversation, particularly related, like we can go over the Gottman stuff, the research on what makes relationships work, with the eye towards not just romantic relationships. Are y'all good with that?
I think
Does
that's
that
great.
sound-
Let's
Love
meet.
to see you
I have
next
an idea. Let's
Saturday.
meet again.
Head on over to our website at therapistuncensored.com. Check out our show notes and make sure to subscribe to receive updates about future episodes. And thank you very much for listening.
Therapist Uncensored is Ann Kelly, Patty Alwell, and Sue Marriott. Cameron Lindsay edits the show.